Hey guys, welcome to another technical Night Owl Ramble. As you can see in the window behind me, the sun is setting, but it's fine. So recently I had put up a poll on my channel in the community tab of what would you guys like to see me talk about a little bit more, and the winner so far was deity. So I figured tonight we would kind of talk about that a little bit, and I wanted to specifically discuss signs from deity and what to do when a deity calls you. These two subjects are slightly different, but at the same time, they definitely intertwine, so I figured that it would be best to just discuss them in one video. A little disclaimer though before I get into it, I want to open with my own personal experiences. It's the best way for me to relate and be able to provide you guys with really kind of more well-rounded subject here. But um, also that this is my own experiences and that might differ from everyone else's. As we all know, you can ask 10 pagans the same question and get 10 different answers. So just take that with what you will and keep it in mind as I go on. But I wanted to sort of jump in with a little bit of chronological concept of how deity has evolved in my practice. And first of all, I started this path really being actually adverse to deity, which honestly, when I look at it now, was a little bit contradictory because I have felt goddess in particular my whole life. When I was little, I could tell that there was a goddess energy that I could feel, but I wasn't entirely sure what it was. So I just called it Mother Earth, and that seemed to work for me. And then when I kind of dipped my toes into Christianity, I sort of was like, oh, this doesn't really work for me, and I'm gonna just gracefully make an exit. And that was extremely short lived in my life. And then there was a few years where it was just quiet, but the I just kind of went on being a kid, basically, but the questions and the feelings and everything I was experiencing was still there. And it started to ramp up a little bit with intuitive experiences, and that led me to explore psychic abilities. And thus, I turned the corner to learning about witchcraft and Wicca, and then to paganism. And I didn't really start exploring the concept of deity um, until probably my mid 20s is really when it started to ramp up. I've always been interested in deity in the sense of I have loved mythology since I was a kid. In fact, one of my favorite books is called Our Universe, and it's from National Geographic. And inside of it, it's mostly just books on our solar system. But with each of the planets' descriptions, it shows where they got their namesake and where they got it in Roman or Greek mythology. And to me, that was always really, really cool. And then there was my deep love for Sailor Moon and how that had a lot to do with the planetary symbols. And, there's just, I've always been connected in some way to pretty much most of a lot of pagan concepts throughout my life. It's just so funny because you come to this point, you realize, yeah, I think I've been this my whole life. uh, but I still resisted deity for quite some time, and I resisted it because of my misconceptions of how I felt that paganism needed to be. I felt that it needed to be very similar to Christianity, and it took me a long time to understand that that's not, they're different, and that's okay. And I can look at it this way, and the next person can look at it a different way, and that's perfectly fine. So, the first deities that kind of came into my life were Kuan Yin, and I still actually have a statue of her in my house. She is now one of my household deities, so she actually resides on a small shelf in my living room, as well as Basset, who I actually mostly call on to care for my kitties. But I also do that with Freya as well, because Freya is my matron. And Freya is also associated with cats. But it was kind of tinkering around with those couple of deities first, and while the relationship stayed in a sense, the connection stayed. In a sense, it became less prevalent as time went on. And then I started to turn towards the Celtic deities, and I worked with Danu, who I now realized was sort of the personification of that Mother Earth presence that I had felt when I was younger. And I really enjoyed her motherly energy, and she was a very kind but sort of subtle, in a way, deity. At least that's how she came to me. And then came the Morgan, and the Morgan was one of the most intense deities I ever worked with. And I actually thought that I would probably have her as a working deity in my practice for quite some time. But it was one of those situations where it was pretty intense for a good year and a half, and then suddenly it wasn't. Things went quiet, and I felt a tremendous amount of grief because I no longer felt connection with any deity, and I was not sure what was happening with my path. I could sense that the Norse gods were coming, but I just wasn't sure when. It could have been a month from then, it could have been 50 years from then. I had no idea. I just knew that at some point in my life it was going to happen. And it happened about a year and a half later. And the first one to contact me was Odin, which was interesting because Odin is actually one of the ones that I don't really have the biggest connection with. But until he stepped into my practice, I primarily only worked with feminine, divine feminine energy. And it's not that I was uncomfortable with divine masculine so much to the point that I repelled it, but it was more just that I had to really sort out a little bit of my feelings about divine masculine versus the Abrahamic God, and really how I wanted to look at that and how it was affecting me on a psychological level. So, signs from deity will kind of happen in many different ways in my experience. And with Odin, he first came in and he wasn't exactly subtle. He came in a dream. And to me, when that happens with deity, they're not really going to have a very subtle energy. At least that's in my personal experience. And what was interesting, though, is that he came in with this dream and it led me on the path towards the Norse gods. But after that, he sort of stepped aside and let me just do my thing. He's there's a lot of time throughout the year where I actually don't feel Odin's energy at all. I tend to very it tends to ramp up a little bit more around winter solstice, but for the lighter half of the year, his presence is almost not really. But how he comes to me is very, I want to say Gandalf. He just really has that old, wise, fatherly sage type archetype. That's just how he really presents himself to me. But it's the visits and the signs from Odin are far and few between at this point. It's just interesting. But then you go to my experience with Freya, which was all of a sudden I started to just want to learn about her. And I wanted to really know her story and research her. And then suddenly, as soon as I started doing that, I didn't even do anything ritualistic or magic. I just started reading about her. Her energy came through like a freight train. And it has stayed, that was 5 years ago, it has stayed so prevalent in my practice that she is the one and only deity I have dedicated myself to, which, if you guys have seen my other videos and on this and my journey with her, that was after 20 years of being a witch, I finally dedicated myself to a deity. So it was a huge, huge step for me. But I'm just basically my point that I'm trying to make is that it doesn't necessarily have to be some big thing for a deity to try and get your attention. And sometimes the ones that get your attention in a more subtle way end up being the ones that actually really hang about in interesting ways. Um, the other ones, and sometimes some of them will come in and be there for a certain amount of time and then leave. Maybe they'll be there for a certain intention or something that you're just kind of going through or working through. For instance, I really think that was my experience with the Morgan. She kind of came in so I could really get head to head with my depression. And then as soon as I hit a really powerful breaking point with my depression and I went over a really big, like massive mountain and massive breakthrough with it, then her energy just left. And that was just it. And for, again, as I said, for a while there, I grieved just feeling nothing from the gods. Um, but as I have grown more comfortable with my concept of deity, it's been really rewarding in the sense of understanding how I want to see the divine through this lens and how this works for me. And this is how I connect from something bigger than myself. And I do feel that deity is a wonderful guide or a wonderful presence to just helping you feel less alone in a lot of ways. There are many times where I will just sit at my altar and I will just want them to be present and speak and just sit with me while I speak or while I sort through my feelings. Um, the biggest one that has helped me with that is Hell, and her coming into my practice was subtle, but then not. It was interesting. Essentially, I sort of gathered that she has been hanging about for a few years, but didn't really make herself known until I was ready to know that it was her. And it was a lot of little subtle stuff here and there. It's a little hard to describe, but deity can come to you in many different ways. It can be synchronicities, it can be signs from animals, it can be, again, just wanting to suddenly know more about their story. It can be something not so subtle, like I said, like a dream. So, but hell, it was, I started to be pulled towards her energy and start to understand her a little bit more. And it was very similar to Freya in the sense that I suddenly just really wanted to know all I could know about her. Only the difference was that I was called to do actually a meditation, and she came out of the woodwork essentially and was just like, yep, I'm here. This is happening. And you are going to go through something and you're going to come out and you won't be the same. Literally 2 weeks later, I went through one of the worst experiences of my life. I ended up on the wrong medication to treat my depression, which caused me to have psychosis. And it was extremely terrifying. I don't want to get too much into it. I have spoken about it a little bit on my channel, and I'm always very forward about mental health awareness on this channel. This is a platform that I really want to use that for, but this is not exactly the subject of the video. But I will say that I know that that was connected to her. It's just a feeling I have. And I think that when you are exploring working with deity, you really have to start trusting your intuition more. I can't explain my logic or reason as to why I feel that it was connected to her. I just know that it was. And it's something that intuition, that sense of knowing, um, it's claircognizance. It it goes beyond anything you can try and reason with. It's just, I know that this is this, and I just know it. I can feel it deep in my soul, and that might be a little bit hard to wrap your head around, but everybody has had those feelings. Most of the time, you call them gut feelings, and I'd say that when you experience them, especially when it comes to deity, trust them because that's also a sign from them trying to speak to you. Um, so my experiences with hell were definitely, as again, they started out subtle and then they really weren't. And I, in that time, thought that because hell is a goddess of death, that that would mean that Santa Muerte, who is right there, hanging out on my altar for the dead, I had thought that that meant that she had to exit my practice. And I at first thought that that's what was happening. And then I realized that it was only because I thought it needed to happen when it didn't. And it was a very interesting experience in the sense of she was just like, no, I would like to stay. I'm just going to hang out on your altar for the dead and watch over your ancestors and your beloved dead. And that's where I want to be. And hell essentially more helps me with shadow work and trying to navigate my mental health and my experiences in life and teaching me really how to face my shadows and hold accountability for myself. And Freya is more of the self empowerment, self love, like awakening the priestess in me or the warrior archetype. That's just generally what I get from her. And I also work with Frigg, who is the All Mother, and she's hanging out on my altar as well. And I keep a lot of things by her that have to do with the phase of life that I'm in, which is the mother. And I go to her for guidance in motherhood, which is huge for me because I lost my mother to cancer when my sons were only 1 and 3. So going through motherhood without a mother, but being able to go to a mother deity is, I don't think I have the words to describe how rewarding that is. But the signs for Frigg were extremely subtle in the sense of it wasn't a dream or a vision. It wasn't an experience from an animal guide. It was literally one of my best friends telling me, I think you need to work with a mother goddess. And I really think you should talk to Frigg. That's exactly how Frigg came into my life. And I was just like, oh, okay, yeah. And then suddenly I felt her energy like that. And it was like, oh, yep, there she is. And she's like, hey, girl, come talk to me. I know you're having a hard time with motherhood, and I can be here and I can listen and I can help you. And since then, that's exactly what I've done. I will sit at my altar and talk to the All Mother, just as I did with my mother when after my son was born early and was in the NICU, I would call my mother and I would cry because I would think, what am I gonna do? My kid, my firstborn is in the NICU and I don't even know how to navigate this whole situation. And my mother was wonderful at that. So I think that having to be able to go to a mother goddess for that same purpose is very wonderful. So signs of deity don't necessarily have to be something big. Um, they can be something subtle, but the key to understanding them is trusting your own intuition, trusting when you feel that gut feeling, which again is clear knowing or clear cognizance if we're going to kind of talk about the psychic terms, the clairs. But trust those feelings because I think that's going to be your biggest guide. And I think that's at least that's how it's worked for me. That has been my biggest guide when it's come to deity. But also, when we're talking about signs from deity, you also need to understand that you don't necessarily have to have one approach you. That is just how this has worked for me. If you are interested in learning about a deity, start with their story. Learn everything you can about them. And sometimes their energy will start to come into your life. You can even light up your altar and sit down and just ask for their presence, ask for them to come to you, to get acquainted with you. Know that this is a relationship that requires cultivation and requires effort and time and even sacrifice or regular offerings in that sense, if that's how you want to commune with your deity. But it is something that takes some getting used to. It takes some navigation, and that is also okay. There will be setbacks. There'll be times where you won't feel the gods. There will be times where you will feel them very, very much. So much that you might want to be like, hey, back off a little bit, which is another point that I want to bring up. It is okay to say no to a deity. You do not have to have them in your practice if you just don't vibe with them. That is okay. You can respectfully decline and go on your way. You don't need to open up the invitation if you're just not feeling it. That's perfectly fine. So I hope I covered kind of everything that um, I wanted to say in this video, and I hope that it makes sense for all you guys. If you have any other questions, if you want me to branch out a little bit more on what to do when a deity calls you and how to connect with their energy or how to navigate relationships with deity, this is something that's really branching out in my practice, and it's something that's really taking front and center. So I would love to talk more about it, and you're more than welcome to leave comments down below. I am happy to do another video on this subject if there's anything else that you guys would like me to talk about. But that's all I got for you tonight. And now it's officially nighttime because the sun actually set. I can never do this right. But thank you for watching, and as always, blessed be.